Good day. This is Brother Medina for Tuesday, Seventh-day Adventist. And please let us start with a word of prayer. Gracious loving Father, please be with us and grant us understanding. Grant us the truth upon our heart and deliver us from deception and from trouble, even as the end draws near. In Jesus' holy name we pray with thanksgiving unto thee. Amen. So today we want to discuss and investigate the claims of climate change or global warming as they have been doing. We want to investigate this and deal with this, that people may understand just what God thinks of the idea of global warming. In the Bible, there have been accounts of great famines upon the earth after the flood. Famines so severe that people had to remove from one area to another area, and the famines were brought about by drought. So take this thing very clear. Since the days of Abraham, drought have been identified as affecting a large part of the earth in different times. Yes, my dear people. We have had drought in Egypt in the time of Joseph. There was first 7 years of plenty, and then there was 7 years of famine. We have had drought because of no rain falling in ancient Israel, even in the time of Naomi and Ruth, and even later on in the time when Elijah had to pray 7 times for God to send rain. So we are not to think that terrible heat from the sun, we are not to think that terrible famine due to drought, we are not to think that terrible floods is because of climate change or global warming, and global warming through carbon emissions. Yes, my dear people. Because we have always had these problems upon the face of the earth. However, the concept that exists today about climate change or global warming is the claim that human activity is causing global warming. Human activity is causing climate change, or as they are now trying to use today, climate catastrophe. They are blaming human activity. When you ask what human activity, they tell us the release of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere due to human activity. And they say with the release of this carbon or CO2, these are greenhouse gases, and these greenhouse gases are heating up the earth, and as a result of that we have a lot of problems on the earth. That's the claim. See, if you fly on an aeroplane, if you use too much electricity, if you breathe out so often, if you have large herds of cows and the cows flatulence or pass wind, we are being told all of that is causing carbon emissions and therefore global warming or climate change. That's what they are telling us. Now, this whole thing about global warming is tied in to carbon emissions. So when somebody comes and tell you climate change, they mean global warming, and they mean it happens by carbon emissions. That's what they mean. Now that whole thing is a terrible falsehood, a terrible lie. Yes, my dear people. Or they will say, you are a climate denier. So they create a derogatory phrase, climate denier, and throw it at you to make you look like a foolish person because you are going against the obvious. But what they do not tell you is that the science, or I should say, the so-called science behind the claim of global warming or climate change is a false science. Yes, my dear people. Today, there have been a lot of talk about the climate strike that took place just recently, where children, instead of going to school, left school and protested all over the world, in the cities of the world, calling upon their governments to do something, to act quickly and do something about climate change. And as a result of that, governments are now looking up because this strike, this climate strike, took place while the UN was having its conference on climate change. Yes, my dear people. As it is children, people are saying, we've never seen children so united before all over the world on this point. What we are looking at here is not spontaneous actions from children who have had education in the science of climate change. No, that's not what we are looking at. We are looking at an organized, connected, or interconnected plan that caused those children to come out on the streets and protest, when many of them, a vast amount of them, do not understand that the science behind global warming, or climate change as they call it, is a fraud. And we will show you that. Not just only that. They have had these children protesting, and they do not understand that climate sciences is tied in to globalism or the New World Order. Yes, my dear people. They do not understand that. We have even had the Pope writing an encyclical, Laudato Si, a social document in which he calls for the creation of organizations and governmental bodies to deal with climate change as an urgency. This document also tells us that we must have a Sunday rest to help us. But some people think that climate change issues today will lead to what they call the mark of the beast, which is a Sunday law legislated to force people into that religious festival. Some people think that it is environmentalism that will cause that. That is false prophecy. That's not a biblical teaching. Although they take this false science and current movement and put it upon the Bible. Yes, my dear people. In fact, if we look at what the Bible tells us in Isaiah 26 and verse 9, here is what we are told. I quote, "With my soul have I desired thee in the night. Yea, with my spirit within me, I will seek thee early. So in other words, Isaiah is saying he desires God in the night. With his experience in his heart, he would seek God early. And why he said this? For when thy judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. End of quote. This clearly explains to us why we are seeing an increase in hurricanes, tornadoes, while there has been a terrible change in the weather pattern. We call it global extreme weather pattern, GEWP, global extreme weather pattern. That's what we are seeing. But now they are calling this evidence of climate change. Not at all. We have had global extreme weather patterns before. Before we have had all these industries, before we have had this claim of releasing greenhouse gases into the air, we have had global extreme weather pattern upon the face of the earth, or GEWP. We have had that over and over in the past until now. And you cannot say that what causes this is in fact carbon emissions. Yes, my dear people. Now, there was a time in 1922 where we had a terrible heat wave upon the face of this earth, lasting for years, even into the early 1930s. We had a terrible heat. They said global heating. Then after that, we've had terrible cold. And in the 70s, there was a whole school of thought on the environment telling us a new ice age is coming. At that time, they were saying it is an ice age that was coming. But lo and behold, the ice age never came. So what have they done now? They've gone back to global warming, and since global warming had proven to be a fraud, they're just changing him to climate change. Yes, my dear people. Let us take a look at that a bit. Different satellites were put up over the earth to check and see if the earth was heating up. By 1996, they found that the heating of the earth had stopped. By 1996, they had 15 satellites stationed around the earth. Hear what I'm telling you. They had 15 satellites stationed around the earth to check the heating up of the earth in various ways. By 1996, they found that heat on the earth had stopped. At that time, the scientists called it a pause. Some called it a hiatus. But the pause went on for 6 months, meaning for 6 months after 1996, the earth was not heating up. In other words, the temperature of the earth slightly went down. So they called it a pause or a hiatus. And guess what? 3 years later, it remained the same. 6 years later, it remained the same. 10 years later, it remained the same. 18 years later, it remained the same. And by 18 years and 8 months, coming to the Paris Accord on global warming or climate change, the satellites were saying there were no evidence of the earth heating up or of global warming. So what did they do? A particular scientist was paid. And what did he do with that corrupt money? Changed the data from all these satellites, claiming that there was a mistake there. Now, how far will they push us into incredulity? Notice this. We can expect 2 or 3 satellites to make a mistake. But you're telling me all 15 satellites made a mistake, that you had to adjust the data coming from those satellites 1 week before the Paris Accord or the Paris meeting on climate change. 1 week before. Even when the Pope wrote his Laudato Si and presented it in May before the Paris Accord, which was in June, he wrote as if climate change or global warming was a reality. And all the satellites said no. So they had to falsify the data. You're saying, brother, do you know what you're saying? You're giving conspiracy theories. Hello, there are so many documents and so many evidences that show what we are seeing here. The data was changed to 0.18 of the increase of heat. 0.18. Now that figure was still much, much too low to give any proof of global warming or climate change. But what it did do is to give the impression that the heat started to go back up and that the period that they call the hiatus or the pause had ended. But the whole information was falsified. Yes, my dear people, this is what they did. And from that time onwards, they would give you certain computer models and certain predictions to tell you that global warming or climate change is true. But all of these predictions have failed. Their latest prediction is that within 12 years, all sorts of trouble is going to destroy the earth through global warming, through climate change, through the emission of carbon. That's what they're telling people now. But hear this. The scientists that claim climate change or global warming are paid scientists from various United Nations organizations on climate change, and also paid by George Soros's organizations. You ask, why are they so pushing climate change? Because the policies that must be enacted to deal with climate change takes away the rights and freedoms of the populations of the earth and gives much, much more power to the international bankers who are behind all of this. Yes, my dear people. So much power is lost and rights and freedom is lost that it is the creation of a new world order. The Pope himself called for the creation of governmental bodies. He even gave a figure, 50. And these bodies will have power to make laws and to penalize countries and governments that do not follow certain plans that have been given to deal with climate change. The statement actually pushes a global government, which he uses in his writings. The issue of climate change is global governance, a new world order. And a new world order is a fallacy, a foolishness, and a destructive thing. Let me tell you this, my dear people. Carbon dioxide is plant food. Carbon dioxide is plant food. When you breathe out carbon dioxide, the plants use it to get more green and to grow. it is food for plants. Scientific tests have shown if you release more CO2 into the atmosphere, plants will grow more healthier, more stronger, and you'll have more plants. If you cut down the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the plants will not strive as they do. To tell us that the world is facing destruction because of carbon emissions is a lie. When they tell us about greenhouse gases, they give us a certain percentage, parts per million. Do you know, if you were to follow their theory on greenhouse gases, you would have to stop the process of clouds forming and rain falling? Yes, my dear people. Do you know why? Because more than 90%, about 95% of greenhouse gases is water vapor. Graphs and charts have shown that 95% of greenhouse gases is water vapor. CO2 is very minimal, and other gases from using fossil fuel is very minimal. The amount released cannot cause significant interference in the climate to the point of causing the terrible extremism in the weather we are seeing today. It is not about climate change, it's the judgments of God. And the judgments of God in the land supposed to cause the people to learn righteousness. But what have they done by substituting the judgments of God in people's perception to false scientific theories, to naturalistic causes or false scientific theories behind the GEWP or the global extreme weather pattern? What have they done? By giving you naturalistic causes for the judgments of God, they've turned your eyes away from the fact that God is pointing out the evils that are on the earth and calling men to repentance and therefore to learn righteousness. So that instead of people getting any more wiser and learning righteousness, they get more listless, more careless, more corrupted, because they figure it is just naturalistic causes that is behind this problem. I was driving in a taxi, and the taxi driver who knows me, we were talking. I showed him a lot of the destructions taking place on the earth. And what did he do? I was showing him about the judgments of God. He quickly presented me to the issue of global warming as the cause of what was taking place and lost interest in hearing what I was talking. So the concepts of global warming actually takes away your mind from the fact that it is the judgments of God in the earth or in the land to cause the people to learn righteousness. And they have now put these judgments as coming from naturalistic causes, which is the release of carbon dioxide upon the face of this earth from human beings. That's what they have told us. But that whole thing is false, because there are many scientific graphs that shows us that if you want to deal with climate change, you have to ask yourself, what is the climate? Just what is the climate? Climate is always regional. The climate in Sangre Grande, which they call the bathroom of the country, is different to the climate in, let's say, Caroni or Central Trinidad. Yet it is only in this country. There's so many different things that interfere with the climate that is regional in different countries. You have the sun, you have the rain, you have the wind, you have the growth of trees. All of these things interfere with the climate in that region. But yet they're giving you the impression that the whole climate of the earth has changed because of breathing out carbon dioxide or releasing carbon into the air. They have even blamed cow passing winds for that too. The whole thing is false. The whole thing is erroneous. And we're going to have to talk about that again. But we want you to know the issue is not climate change. It is the judgments of God to cause the people to learn righteousness. May you recognize these facts, and may you, when you see these terrible disasters taking place by land and by sea, recognize it is not climate change, it's the judgments of God. So, if anyone wants this program, call us at 625-0446. 625-0446. We'll give you this program plus others that went before. And may God bless you until we meet again as you face a natural climate, not from breathing out carbon dioxide, but a climate that is affected by the wrath of God. So may the grace of God bless you in Jesus' holy